there, welcome back to Arty Julie on Patreon. Today we're looking at painting this picture of the girl, pretty girl. We're going to use some cling film or food wrap on the bottom here and a bit of salt in the background, so lots of fun techniques to play with. You can find the full details, the handout sheet and the trace down sheet, which is most of the vital bit, should be able to download them off this site. Okay, let's get going. Right, so I've just been transferring the picture of the girl onto my watercolour paper, and you can do that by downloading the cheat sheet, as I call them, but the trace down sheet, scribbling on the back with a soft pencil or a graphite stick, something like that. Don't use charcoal, just use a graphite stick, a soft pencil, putting it back on to your watercolour paper, going back over the lines, and that will transfer the image onto the watercolour paper. I'm going to use Bockingford, I like 420 gram, 425 gram, but I think this is 300 grams, so it's a little bit lighter in weight. Now, because we're going to do a mad background around this girl eventually, I thought, it doesn't say it in the instruction sheets here, but I thought afterwards it might be easier just to put a few flicks of masking fluid around the top of her head and where her curls are coming down into the back of the, where the background's going to overlap them. So I do that by wetting a brush, rolling it in household soap to protect my brush. Masking fluid is like a glue and it can wreck your brushes, but if you soap them like that first, you can then, it'll wash out of your brush very easily. I'm just going to flick a few little bits of hair, wispy bits, get them all in different directions, just on the edge there, where the background might overlap it and lose that little bit of the hair coming out there. So don't have to go all the way down. I think with mine, originally I managed to avoid it and cut the background back into the hair, but this is just a little bit easier for you, just to put a bit of masking on there, although it doesn't actually say that on the instructions. And that's about all you need for that part. So we're going to start off with the painting the girl herself, and we're going to do the difficult bits first, and that's the skin tones. And getting all the modelling right on the body. So to do this, we're just going to use probably a 6 or an 8 brush, whichever one you feel more comfortable with. This is just a nylon-y type brush. Some people use sables. I don't particularly like sables, especially if you're a beginner, because it holds so much paint and water. It's a bit uncontrollable. So I'm going to use this number 8 round. It's just a nylon-y type brush, but it's still soft and flexible. And with that, I'm just going to mix up the colours I'm going to put into her skin tones here. And you'll see that she's got mostly a reddish brown colour on her. So that's a nice bit of burnt sienna. So I'm just taking that and making a puddle of that somewhere on my palette. So I take a bit of that colour and move it away from the palette and just make a little puddle of it. I tend to test it somewhere first to see how strong it is. And that's that one. It's also, because we're going to put a red dress on her, she'll have a bit of reflected light, a bit of alizarin crimson coming into that. So I've got a bit of red here, a little bit of alizarin crimson. So again, just make a little bit of a small puddle of that, just not a huge puddle, just a little bit of paint mixed up, ready and waiting. And then some stronger burnt umber. Again, I'll just make a bit of a puddle of that somewhere. I'm trying to find a clean place on my palette's a bit difficult these days. I don't tend to keep my palettes very clean. Just a little bit of the paint there, so I can tickle in a little bit of the dark there. I'll get a small brush at the ready for tickling into the little shadowy bits. Now I would start on, when you're doing a person and doing skin tones, what I like to do is just break it up into manageable sections. So start on an area where you've got a natural joint line. There's a joint line between a chin and a neck here, down the arm obviously, and then this arm's a separate one. So I'd start perhaps on this shoulder and the back here. And we're going to wet this, but only with a small brush. Just wet it over the neck, up to her ear. You can probably go over her ear as well, just at this stage. Use a clean brush and clean water, not a grubby brush like I'm using, but clean brush, clean water, and you're just putting enough water on so it'll allow the paint time to blend. So this is just putting some water on, making sure it's staying damp but not soaking wet. So I put a bit of water on. It happens to be a slightly grubby colour, but it'll be fine for this because we're going to add colours into it. So I'm just pause for a minute and just move that around so it's neat around the edges, because the paint will run to wherever you put water. So if you keep it nice and neat around here, it'll only run up to those edges and stop. So once I've made sure I've got some water on, you might want to just run your brush over and take out any puddles. If you move your paper around, you can see where it's shiny and where it's a little bit on the dull side. So if it's dull, it needs a bit more water on. And then we're going to go for it then with the burnt sienna. We're going to put burnt sienna over most of this area, apart from the highlight on the shoulder. So where the highlight on the shoulder is, we'll work around that and leave that lighter, or you could lift it out a little bit later on. But we're just putting some burnt sienna on just to give her the skin tones, a nice rich skin tones. Just be a little bit cautious with that. You don't want it too strong, otherwise she'll look like she's just had a spray tan. But and that's why it's easy just to go a bit mad with those. Again, it's going to be lighter on top of her arm there, so we'll leave a little bit around that arm there to be a bit lighter, and again down her hand, the top of her hand will probably go back to being quite light as well there. If you start to look at the picture, she'll start to pick up a bit of reflected light in some areas, because the dress is going to be a lovely pinky colour. Perhaps across the shoulder here as well, you'll have a little bit of the pink colour. I'm then going to swap to a slightly smaller brush. This is probably a 2 round. I go in with my stronger burnt umber now. Give that a bit more of a clean, because that's got something grubby on it. And then we're just going to tickle in these shadowy bits into round her armpits here, just making those a bit stronger, just giving her a bit of a shape to her. Again, round under her ear here, under her chin, just give you the shape under the neck there. Perhaps where it goes tucks down into the hair, it'll go a bit darker. And this is the subtlety where it's starting to blend out across the body here, perhaps a little bit darker in between the shoulder braids. As soon as this starts to dry, stop painting, because it will go stripy and liney. So we just want to blend in a little bit while it's still damp. But if it's dry, don't work anymore, because it will just go into hard lines. I'm just putting a little bit under her fingers, so her fingers are just curling under as she's gripping a dress there, just to give her a bit of shape down here. If I can tickle her in a little bit more, yeah, it's still just damp enough for it to blend slightly and a bit round her elbow here. But once it's dry, you can't do it. You have to wait until it's completely dry, re-wet it, and then try and blend it in. If you try adding water to it, it will go cauliflowery and patchy, so it has to be fairly quick working with that. So that's the arm and back done, surprisingly quickly, although just saying that I am going to add just a little bit more dark just into that area there, so it tucks in behind her hair a bit further. Again, that's just the burnt umber. So now I can go on to a different area. I'll do this arm here. So again, wetting it all over, bit of clean water, making sure this stays glossy wet. If you're using cheaper paper, you might want to wet it once, pause for a minute and re-wet it so it stays wet long enough for you to work with it. I'm just taking the puddles out of that one. Then we're going to do the same again. In with the burnt sienna. It's a basic skin tone for this girl. And then bring that down the arm a little way. And it's getting lighter on the top. We'll make that just a little bit stronger under her hair here, a bit darker, perhaps down by the end elbow then, and as it comes back out into the light, again actually it's picking up a bit of reflected light down here, so a tiny touch of the crimsony colour again under her arm, and that will make sense when you start to put the dress on. Right, now for the slightly more difficult bit, making sure that this is completely dry, which it is now. We're going to have a look at the face. And this takes a bit of nerve really to get the shaping and the colouring right onto her face. We're not going to put her features on at this stage. We're going to come back and do the features right at the end. But at this stage we're just going to wet the face, over the face, over the eyes, over the nose. But even though I'm wetting it, I'm not going to put paint everywhere, so it's got to stay wet. But I won't wet the teeth. I'll just go around the mouth and leave the teeth to be lighter. If it was a bigger shape, I might avoid the whites of her eyes, and I might actually put some shading into the sides of her mouth where the teeth are coming in there. But this is so small that you can't really tell that. You just want a little bit of shaping. I'm pausing for a minute, and I'm just making sure that this stays wet. If you've got the good quality Bockingford 425 paper, it will stay wetter longer, so you don't need to pause, you can just go for it. But it is a matter of timing with this. And because, again, this is quite small, I'm just going to swap to a slightly smaller round brush and start to work. Burnt sienna, that can go round the face, over the ear a little way, under the chin. So round the side of the face, under her hair, into the eye sockets, down the nose a little way, down the nose on the other side, under her nose, so the tip of her nose will remain quite light, under her mouth, under her chin. So we're just letting those colours sit there a moment or two. So it's around the head, under her chin, down the side of the mouth, into the eye sockets, under her nose, into the eye, just to give you the shaping there. I'm then going to make the eye sockets a little bit stronger and darker. It looks a bit scary, but it works. So going into the eye sockets with a bit of burnt umber. So bring that up to the edge of the nose. Oops, I've got a bit of paint on there. I'll sort that out in a moment. Again, just under the nose a little way, making that a bit darker. Perhaps just under the chin, just a little tiny bit more in her ear, a little bit under her mouth. But again, the moment it starts to dry, stop. So I think that'll do for the shaping on her face. What you want to make it look like as if it's three-dimensional before we start adding the features onto her. So now just thinking about it, what if that's still slightly damp, I'm just going to put a little bit of pink into her cheeks as well, just a little bit of alizarin crimson. I've put my grubby finger on there, so I'm just going to wet that, rub it, and then dab it with a bit of kitchen roll to lift out my grubby paw print that I've got on there. So that's mostly the skin tones done, which is quite easy for that one. So now we can start to put the first layer onto her hair. This goes onto dry paper. We will do the hair in a couple of layers, but we're going to put some little streaks of weak yellow ochre. Make sure that it's weak. It comes out very strong and dark. Yellow ochre can be, or raw sienna is a bit better. It's not so harsh as yellow ochre. So just onto dry paper, small brush, and you're just bringing down some curls and folds in a, so some curls down into her hair here. And then once we've done a few bits with the yellow ochre, you can let that dry for a few moments, because this time we want stripes and texture into it. So let it dry for a few moments, and then we're going to work back in, not everywhere, but we're going to put a bit of burnt sienna in as well. That's richen that colour up a little bit. She'll still look blonde, even though she's got a little bit of burnt sienna in. Well, it depends how much burnt sienna in. You turn her into a redhead very quickly if you put too much burnt sienna in, but just adding a little bit around the sides of the face here. This is starting to get a little bit wet. I will put a little bit more, I'll put a bit more burnt umber in, but what you'll probably find is if it gets too wet, it will start to blur in too much. So we'll put a bit of colour in, and then before we finish, we'll come back and just put a little bit more tone into her to get some shaping into the hair as well. So just bringing a few bits round the side of her face. It's lighter on this side and then darker as it gets to the face. So just adding a few little extra curls, a little bits of dark around the edges there to add her hair into it. But pause for a minute, and then we can always come back and put some more in. So now that lot's drying, we can work on a dress. And I've worked on a dress in two different ways. On the original handout sheet, we're just going to wet the dress all over, put strong colours in, and a pinch of salt if you want to make it sparkly and flowing through. But I thought it might be quite nice to actually put some cling film on this to give it that look like chiffon and lace and things like that. So just for this area, if you get some food wrap, it's just plastic food wrap or cling film as we call it over here, and just roll a piece out of that, and then if you're very organised, you've still got it in its container and you can rip it carefully off there. And whenever I'm using cling film, I always make sure that I've got enough to cover the area that I want. So I'm going to make a little dress for her. So just making up a little dress like this. Don't screw it up too much. Just getting some little folds and things. And I'm just going to put that to one side. So that's going to be the flow of the dress there. Put that to one side while I put the paint on. So the cling film has to go on while this is still wet. So I'm going to now mix the colours up for the dress here. I used Alizarin Crimson and some darker colours, some indigo to make it go a bit darker in the shadowy areas. But if you want to use Rose Madder's or purpley colours or anything like that, you can use the colours of your choice. So I'm going to make some stronger paint up now. So this is a puddle of Alizarin Crimson. So a nice big puddle of that, quite strong with that. And then I'm going to make a puddle, just a small puddle of a bit of indigo. I'll squeeze a bit of that out into an area on my palette here. And you might even want to put a bit of indigo and Alizarin Crimson in there as well, just to give you an in-between colour for the shadowy bits. Clean my brush. And then I'm going to really wet this. I'm going to take the mop brush. I'm going to wet the dress where I want the skirt to be. So just coming out here, just letting the water come across the picture. Down here, a little bit more across this way. Just getting some really nice bold bits of water onto it. Then straight in with my nice bold Alizarin Crimson. Sorry, my paper's escaping at the moment. So we're going to put some nice big sweeps of this into this area. If I wasn't putting cling film on, I would do this, put the water on, bring these colours down and just let them go, and then perhaps put a pinch of salt into it as well, something like that. So you don't have to put the cling film on, but it's just a fun way of working. That we're just bringing those in. Take them off the bottom of the paper if you want to, and then a little bit round the front of her arm here. So this all has to stay nice and wet. Perhaps a squiggle or two round the front here. Now what she's doing is she's picking the skirt up in her hand here, so she can move and run and dance and things like that. So as she's doing that, this area where it's in by her hand is a stronger paint. So it's giving you the creases into it. So a little bit of the stronger red. And again, round by the waistband, there'll be a bit stronger colour just up there. And then we can go in with this indigo colour. And again, add a flick or two of that to give you the creases and the folds into the dress there. And again, a little bit over this side. Just to give you some shaping. Probably coming out from under her elbow there. Not all the way along, just to give you some folds like that, and a squiggle or two if you want to make it look like a bit more movement into it. And then we're going to put this cling film on. So it's not what's on the handout sheet, but it's just another idea for you. You can follow what's on the handout sheet if you want to, but this is just going to sit on top of the dress. And you can see immediately it goes into these little crinkles and folds, which looks like the material on the dress there. I don't like that fold there. I'm just going to lift it and bring it out in the direction. So it's going out a little bit more that way. Right, so there's not much we can do with this part now until that's dry. We've got to sit and let that bit dry out. But I think you can start to see the effect of that already. So while that's drying, what you can actually do is just peel that back a bit, and then we can do the background, or sorry, the bodice. We'll do the little bit of the bodice first. So just peel it back so it's not overlapping there. And the bodice, we're just doing a similar way to the way that we did the body. We can just wet it first. I'm leaving a little gap here for the waistband. We can put that on afterwards, right at the end there. And again, just put some of the colours in and just think where it's going to be changing colour. That's a bit of grubby alizarin crimson. There we go, that's better. Onto the bodice of her dress. A little bit up around there. And then again, it's going to get some creases and folds into it, so a little bit of the stronger, darker indigo, just so it tucks under her arm. And it's coming out from under their arm there, so she'll get a little crease around the waist there. And again, the same sort of thing on the front here. Oops. Having trouble having clean water onto it at the moment. I keep putting grubby water on, but luckily I can get away with that. So I'm just wetting the front of a chest here, a bust down there, and again a little bit of the pinky red, the alizarin crimson, or whichever red you've used down here, bringing that down to the waistband, and then a little bit stronger red into the arm, crook of the arm, under a bust, and then again just a little bit of the stronger indigo to give her the shaping, as if that crease is coming through underneath here, under a bust, to give it some three-dimensional look. Okay, so that's the dress pretty well finished. So as I say, we can do the background while we're still wait for it. Don't be too eager to take that off. You can check to see whether it's dry. If you move it and the paint still moves, it's not dry, so you have to wait until it's dry. It's quite difficult to dry it with a hairdryer because it just blows it off again. So while that's drying, we can look at the background. I wanted some nice bright colours to get into the background here, so I'm going to use a Prussian blue or a phthalo blue, or quite a strong, this is quite a strong staining blue. We've got quite a big area to make a colour up with. So again, you can test your colours first, so I'll make a puddle of that, and it is quite a strong colour anyway. And then I'll perhaps make something else to put into it, perhaps that with a bit of same blue but with a bit of yellow into it, a bit of cadmium yellow, gives me a bit of greeny colour or something like that to pop in. Might even put a bit of yellow ochre or something as well into it, but just varying shades really, so it's again gives it a bit more interest. So I'll just clean brush, put it to one side, and because we're working down the picture here, it's easier to turn your board upside down and work away from her. So I'm just going to turn that round and work the other way up. So now we've got her upside down, we're going to take some clean water and a mop brush. I'm just going to wet this very carefully around the edge of her. You can wet it into her hair slightly, off the side of the paper. Paint will run to wherever you put water. So if you put a band of water here and you've got a line there, you'll get a line where the water's stopped. So take the water right way away from it. Even if you're not painting that far, take it beyond where you want it to go. So just bringing that up carefully around the edge of a dress here. So this is where you can take your time, relax, have fun with it. The moment you pick your paintbrush up where you've got paint on it, that's when the panic starts. So you just keep that in around close up to her face there, and across the top here. I'm moving my head around so I can see where it's wet, if there's any dry patches in there. I don't want any dry patches because we're going to have to go for this fairly quickly around here. So just want to put a bit of background around her really, fading out towards the ends here. So biggish brush, something like a 12 round, into the paint that I'm going to use. Start at the top here and then just bring it round. Paint, as you see, paint will flow to wherever you've got water. So if you've been careful with the water, it doesn't matter so much with when you're putting the paint on. I am just going to let that blur away into the background there. I don't want it too hard lines onto the background edges. I'm going to work on this side as well at the same time. Just bringing that up to a dress. And what you can't do really is add more water to it once you've started painting. You've got to really just go for it. So I'm just being a little bit careful around the front of her here. A little bit of a wobble there, but it doesn't matter. And then just bring that away. Bring this into it. So once you've got over the awkward bits, I say that part is easy just to flick it round there. I'm going to add a bit of other colour into it as well, a bit of this green perhaps into that, just to give it a bit of variation into the background. Again, this side it's still wet, so I can still put other colours in. Whatever you do, one side, make sure it comes out and through into the little armpit there. I didn't bother wetting that bit because it's too small. Again, carefully up round her shoulder. I might just want to get a small brush, if I can find that. I'll throw that. That's lost that one now. Just do that for around these awkward bits to get a little bit more control with something with a point on it for those bits. But don't take too long because your paper's drying out. And then swap back to a bigger brush for piling the paint on. Just tidy that bit up down there. And then, say, flick it away into the background, a bit of green, a bit of the blue. Glad I made a bit more paint up than I thought I was going to need because I'm running out. So I'll just let that spread away there into the background. Now here, you can do what you like with the background with this part. You can put a pinch of salt on, which is good fun, makes it look like a starry night or something like that. I've got some here, so if you wanted to, this is my little salt grinder, 20 grains onto the background. I think that might have been 21, 22 perhaps. And then we can, before you turn it back, make sure you dry these edges off where you've gone over with the water, because this is where you've carefully done your background, all very nice and neat. Turn it back and there's been a blob of water there and it runs back down over your picture. So make sure that's nice and dry before you turn your picture back round again. So we can turn her around now. So she's starting to look really good. Test my cling film. I think that's just about dry. There's a little bit of wet there. No, I'm going to leave that on just a few more moments while I just do her features. I'll put a little bit more colour into her hair. And I've thrown my little favourite little brush away somewhere. I don't know what I've done with that. But anyway, we'll keep going with this one. So I want to put just a little bit more detail into her hair. We can put a bit more, now this will go on better now it's gone dry. So it'll add a little bit more darks into it. You can add a little bit more darks into the background here. This is just burnt umber, building up a bit more shape into her curls and things down here. We can probably put a waistband on. So I'm going to use just a little bit of yellow ochre for the waistband, just straight onto there. Just peel the cling film back a bit. And a dot or two of indigo, just to give it a little bit of a change of light in there so it's not too different. So just pausing for a moment while I find my little brush. So right, I've got my little brush now. We're just going to pop her features in and then we can whip off the little bit of the cling film down the bottom here. The last little bit of the details, we just want to put the eyes in with a bit of burnt umber and, well, we can put the eyebrows in just with a little flick of burnt umber. Be careful of your background if it's still wet now, don't lean on that. So you just want a little flick for an eyebrow. Don't make it too strong because it looks quite ferocious if you've got a big eyebrow going across her there. So just a little curve for those. You can alter somebody's expression just with a flick of a brush for an eyebrow. And then we're going to take some burnt umber ultramarine blue, just tiny little bit, or a bit of your indigo if you've got some of that on the go. And we're just going to do for her, the top of her eyes, we're just going to bring the eyelash across the top and a little semicircle, a dot filled in underneath. That's it. Don't go too mad trying to put all the eyelashes on and all the rest of it. So it's a line across the top and a little semicircle underneath. That's it for her eyes. You don't really want to do too much more with that. You might want to just put a little flick of a curve under a nostril for a nose there, just a little bit of burnt umber, just to give a little bit of shaping around the side of the nose. But again, that's it. Less is more with this. The lips, all we're going to do with the lips is a line across the top with the same red as you've used on the dress. And then you go down half the side of the mouth and half the other side at the bottom. Ooh, I've just given her a beauty spot. Look, I just wobbled with my brush there, so I'll just dampen my brush and just take that out. A little bit of pink on the wrong place there. So again, just taking that red across the top of the mouth, and that is about it. If you wanted to, you could just put a tiny weeny bit of dark just in between the top and the bottom lip, just to give that a bit of separation, but you don't really want to do too much more than that. Don't really like that. I'm just going to put a little bit further around. There we go. And I think all we have to do then is make sure this is dry. It's still a little bit damp. We can rub the masking fluid off, because you might find that you want to work back into a curl or two with that. Make sure it is completely dry. Add a flick or two of more of the little bit of brown, so you don't have it too stark white where the masking fluid's just come off. And then we can, yes, it is finally dry. We can have the great reveal for the dress underneath there. And I think that's all there is to it.